But the VCR, I hope we only get one recording for tonight's class. Does that answer your question, Teresa?
Yes.
Okay. So 12D or 12C, in certain circumstances, it may be what, Angel?
Illegal for two physicians to treat the same patient, maybe, or unethical, because they would, it's a conflict if they're treating for the same thing.
Yes, unethical would be better.
Yeah.
All right, so number 13, when a physician is legally responsible for an employee's conduct performed during employment, this is known as what, Darla? Darla must have gotten kicked off. Okay, so how about you, Barb?
It's a vicarious liability called respondent superior, which means let the master answer.
Yes. Okay, and number 14 is a claims assistant professional neglects to submit an insurance claim to a Medicare supplemental insurance carrier within the proper time limit. What type of insurance is needed for protection against the loss for this client? What would you say, Emily?
I don't think I did it right. I had reimbursement specialist.
Actually, it would be errors and omissions insurance.
I must have read it wrong.
That's okay. All right, multiple choice. On 15, we have two billing components that are facility and professional. Professional billing is done for who? Lisa? Physician. 15 is D. 16, Teresa.
C, MPP.
Yes, MPP. 16 is C. All right, how about 17, Angel?
The insurance bill and B.
Actually, the individual responsible for documenting the patient's clinical notes would be the physician.
The physician, it's passed on too. Oops.
All right, 18 would be the letter D, multi-skilled health practitioner. And 19 would be A, federal and state programs. All right, part 3 is true and false. So number 20 would be true. 21 is false. 22 is true. 23 is false. And 24 is true. Okay. And we did all that, right? Okay, I said no to that critical thinking. I said no to the critical thinking on page 6. And I said we would do, okay, this is the one I wanted to talk about. So, on page 7, I had you accessing the internet and to find a couple of resources that would list the benefits for students trying to locate job opportunities. You can just share with me what you found, Lisa.
I'm sorry, but I didn't have that marked to do. I'm sorry.
That's fine. How about you, Barb?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I really understood what I was looking for, but I found a website. It's Indeed.com, Indeed.com, and you could search for employment by your state. So you put in your area, and it came up with all jobs available.
Yep.
I have another one that's a company that does billing, all kinds of medical billing. My nephew's wife works for them. It's EMDEON, EMDEON.com/careers. And that's also by state. You look up jobs by state. And then I found the American Medical Billing Association, which has webinars, networking, all kinds of support for people in the business.
Excellent. Okay. Emily, did you find anything?
I found a medical billing specialist, one that was careers@mainehealth.org, and it had job shadowing available, and that was about the only one that I saw that actually had that available. And I found healthcaresource.com, and that had a whole different things for volunteer opportunities and other positions that were nearby. It had a bunch of classes too that were offering things towards the certificate if you weren't.
Okay. Okay. How about you, Teresa? Did you find anything different?
No, I did not. Unfortunately, I was in Washington, D.C. and had no internet access in my room for the week.
What a shame.
I was unable to do any online information. I just got back from the airport, so any questions I can't answer tonight. I'm sorry.
That's fine. How about Angel? Did you get a chance to do any?
Yeah, I went under www.stericycle. They do like medical jobs and office jobs.
Oh, what is that again?
Then Stericycle, STERICYCLE. They're out of Winthrop. It's a new company for billing and stuff. And then there was one that was www.jobsinme.com under the job bank from like the Career Center.
Okay, great. Okay, good work, everyone. The reason I did that was just to kind of give you an idea of what you might be looking for as you start this process looking for a job. So let's move on to Chapter 2, Compliance. All right. Over on recovery audit contractor, what is one of the key terms? What is the key abbreviation for a recovery audit contractor? It's RAC, RAC. All right. I noticed over on page 10, they gave you a lot of study outline information to help you with HIPAA and the privacy and security rule. Let's go right on to page 11 and do the assignment 2-1 in your workbook.
Doreen, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
In Chapter 1 and in Chapter 2, there's NPP, and they're both different. One is the non-physicians practitioners, and in Chapter 2 is the notice of privacy practices.
Right.
Is that going to be differentiated? I mean, how are we going to know the difference?
It will be in the context of how it's being used.
Okay.
It's just going to be paying attention to how is it in what context is it in when it's asked as a question.
And I have another question also. On chapter 2, HCFAP is what is in our workbook answer, but in the book it says HCFAC. Is that the same?
They're probably talking about the Healthcare Fraud Prevention and Enforcement Act, or yes, Healthcare Fraud and Prevention Act, or health. You had it in chapter 1 also. Is that what you said?
Well, I did not find the HCFAP within the chapter 2 material, but I did see the HCFAC. Or am I wrong? See that?
No, I had healthcare fraud and abuse protection. Is that right? There's nothing there?
Well, that's what it is, but I saw the HC.
I'm going to say that is probably a mistype in the workbook. It's Healthcare Fraud Prevention and Enforcement Action Team, Healthcare Fraud and Action. Give me one moment.
I just didn't know if they were the same thing.
Okay, so on page 41 in your textbook, the HCFAC program is the Healthcare Fraud and Abuse Control Program. Healthcare Fraud and Abuse Control Program. So, Healthcare Fraud and Abuse Control Program. And then let's just look and see if in the same area it has HCFAP, Healthcare Fraud and Abuse Program. So they don't even have the correct Healthcare Fraud Prevention and Enforcement Action Team. Healthcare. Okay, that's a good one. I'll research that and come back with an answer for next week.
Okay.
Just remind me. Because the key term up at the top doesn't even match the acronym down below. And
Yeah.
there's no other key term to match to that HCFAP.
Yeah.
And that's what it should be.
Mhm.
Because if you look on page 44, the Healthcare Fraud Prevention and Enforcement Action Team, actually the abbreviation or acronym for that is HEAT, H-E-A-T. So it looks like they have an abbreviation that they don't even have the term up above in the workbook. So if you answered it as Healthcare Fraud Abuse Prevention Program or Healthcare Fraud Abuse Program, that would be acceptable.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm going to say it's a mistype. So we have a mistype. And we also have no key term to match. Are we all in agreement?
Yes.
Yes.
So in essence, what's going to happen is you guys are going to be my guinea pigs to help me find any errors that come up along the way, because this is a new book for this session. And a dozen set of eyes on it is a whole lot better than just mine. So thank you for pointing that out. All right, let's move on to answering the questions, fill in the blanks on page 11. All right, compliance is the process of, what do you think, Lisa?
Meeting regulations, recommendations, and the expectation of federal and state agencies, the healthcare services. You keep going out, so I don't know if it's the weather. Did you get that?
Yes, thank you. Okay, number 2. What is the first step health insurance specialist should take towards achieving compliance so he or she does not violate laws which may result in penalties or fines? What do you think, Angel?
I didn't get any of that after. I got number 1. That was it.
Okay. So what do
Sorry
you
about
have,
that.
Emily? Anything? Number 2?
Emily?
Me?
Yes, Emily.
Sorry. Identifying the laws that regulate the industry.
Yes. Number 3, the primary purpose of HIPAA Title I insurance reform is to provide continuous insurance coverage for workers and their insured dependents when they change or lose jobs. Number 4, the focus on the healthcare practice setting and reduction of administrative costs and burdens are the goals of which part of HIPAA? The answer would be Title II, Administrative Simplification. Number 5, an independent organization that receives insurance claims from the physician's office, performs edits, transmits claims to insurance carriers, is also known as a clearing house.
I was wrong.
Number 6, would be covered entity. Number 7 is business associate. Number 8, privacy officer or privacy official. Number 9, disclosure.
I got that wrong.
Number 10,
Number 9 again.
number 9 would be disclosure. If
All right,
you
thank
give,
you.
release, or transfer information to another entity, this is known as disclosure.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Number 10, data that identifies an individual and describes his or her health status, age, sex, ethnicity, or other demographic characteristics, whether or not that information is stored or transmitted electronically. 11, is breach of confidential communication. You okay, darling?
It is.
11 is breach of confidential communication. 12, privileged communication. And 13, under HIPAA, exceptions to the right of privacy are those records involving A, patients who are members of a managed care organization, B, communicable diseases, C, medical devices that break or malfunction when the Food and Drug Administration requires providers to report certain information, D, criminal investigations or assistance in locating a missing person, material witness, or suspect when the police have the right to request certain information, E, subpoenaed records or search warrants, F, a patient who is suing someone and wants to protect himself or herself, and G, a suspicious death or suspected crime victim, H, workers' compensation cases and physical and physician is employed by a third-party insurance company, and I, child abuse, elder abuse, domestic violence, or gunshot wounds. So, 14. So, Teresa, this would be how we would know the difference. At a patient's first visit under HIPAA guidelines, the document that must be given so the patient acknowledges the provider's confidentiality of his or her protected health information is the Notice of Privacy Practices, also NPP.
Okay.
15 would be mitigation. Mitigation, 15. We have three main sections. We have the administrative safeguards, the technical safeguards, and the physical safeguards. We have three specific areas: business associates, notification of breach, and civil penalties for non-compliance with the provisions of HIPAA. All right, on 18, tell me if it's fraud or abuse. 18A, what do you think, Teresa?
Fraud.
Yes. How about B, Emily? Yes. 18C, Lisa?
Abuse.
Dismissing the co-payment owed by a Medicare patient is fraud.
Fraud, yep.
D, neglecting to refund an overpayment is what? Barb?
Abuse.
Yes. And billing for a complex fracture when the patient suffered a simple break is what, Angel?
Fraud.
Yes. All right. On 19, we have multiple choice answers. 19 would be B. 20 would be D. 21 is C. So far, so good?
Yes.
All right, 22 is B. 23 is A. 24 is A. 25 is C. 26, C. 27 is D. 28, A. 29, C. 30 is D. 31 is B. 32, A.
What'd you say? 31?
31 is B.
Got it wrong.
32 is A. 33 is C. 34 is B. 35 is A. 36 is true. 37 is false. 38 is true. 39 is false. And 40 is true. 41, true. 42, false. 43, true. 44, true. 45, false. 46, true. 47, false. And 48, false. And I think that was as far as I gave you. I don't think I gave you the critical thinking pieces. How'd everyone do? Okay, so when we go over these things, if you don't have everything filled out, or if you get something wrong, what I usually suggest to my students is to just put one line through it and write the correct answer either beside it or above it. Don't erase, because you want to know what you got, what you put incorrectly and what you put correctly, so when you go to look at these, review them, you understand what you did. All right. So let's go ahead and take out our textbook. And we will be on chapter 3, which is the basics of health insurance. Starts on page 53. And for those online students who still have the Adams book, basically, Chapter 3, the basics of health insurance, would be comparable to Chapter 5 in your Adams book. All right. And I think for tonight I said Chapters 3 and 4. One moment. I forgot I gave my syllabus away. All right. So. Okay. So for Chapter 3, we're really learning about the introduction to health insurance. So who can give me a little bit of history about insurance in the United States? How about you, Lisa?
I personally think it's not very good. My opinion of insurance. So,
What's the history of health insurance, though? When did it start?
look. 1800s.
Right, in the 1800s. Actually, our insurance is one of the world's largest businesses, and the health insurance is supposed to offset the cost of illness and or injury. What we see today is a lot of escalating medical costs, but they have limited coverage, insurance coverage options. So what happens is the patients may have more than one insurance policy to defray their health care costs, but as we all know probably from experience, that's not always what happens.
That's what I meant to say, what you just said.
Very good. So with the healthcare reform, we're on page 54. With the healthcare reform, what happened is there was a couple acts put into place. We have the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, and we have the Healthcare and Education Reconciliation Act of 2010. With the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, this was signed into law, which gives certain provisions, and the two laws are commonly referred to as the Affordable Care Act, ACA. And what happens is they have put into place comprehensive insurance reforms that hold your insurance companies to be accountable for lowering costs and guaranteeing choice and enhancing the quality of health care. Then we have the Healthcare and Education Reconciliation Act. And if you look at page 55 in your textbook, you'll see that they had a timeline for implementing the Affordable Care Act that actually started in 2010. So if you look at the timeline, we're almost finished. We're here in 2014, and we're moving toward 2015, where they will pay physicians based on value, not volume, and where physicians may receive higher payments based on the quality of care that they provide. So over on page 56, we're going to talk about insurance contracts. There are 4 considerations in a valid contract. The first thing is an exchange of value, the first premium payment. This is usually submitted with the application. It's also known as a consideration, and there should be something within the contract, within the application. It must be present. There also must be a legal purpose that exists, which means it is an insurable interest in the case of a health insurance policy. So this insurance contract is binding. It's a legal binding written document. Now, we have an implied contract and an expressed contract over on page 57. In the implied contract, it's not manifested by direct words, but it is implied or deduced from circumstances, the general language, or the conduct of the patient. So when you go to see your physician and you meet him for the first time and you kind of talk to one another, there's an implication there. Your body language implies that you want to work with this physician and vice versa. Your consent to accept what the physician says for treatment is your implied consent of working with this physician. Then you have expressed contract, which can be a verbal or a written contract. Your insurance policies, you have major medical. Major medical will extend benefits that contract to offset larger medical expenses that are caused by usually a prolonged illness or serious injury. The insured is an individual or the organization that is protected in case of loss under the terms of the policy. They might also be known as the subscriber, the member, the policyholder, or the recipient. Over on page 58, policy renewal provisions. There are 5 classifications for policy renewal provisions. We have cancelable, which means the policy grants the insurer the right to cancel the policy at any time for any reason. We have optionally renewable. This is where the insurer has the right to refuse to renew the policy on a date. We have conditionally renewable, which the policy grants the insurer a limited right to refuse to renew a health insurance policy at the end of a premium payment period. We have guaranteed renewable and non-cancelable policy. The non-cancelable policy is where the insurer cannot increase premium rates and must renew the policy until the insured reaches the age specified in the contract. Your policy terms. What is a premium, Lisa?
The amount that I pay until my I can't spit it out. The premium is the amount of money that I have to pay before they start covering.
The premium is usually what you have to pay on a monthly, quarterly, or annual basis just to keep your insurance active. The deductible is what you were talking about, where you have to pay a specific amount of money before the insurance will kick in. And then you have co-insurance and co-payment, which is cost-sharing requirement in which the insured will assume a percentage of the fee or pays a specific amount for covered services. So what I want you to remember is that a co-payment or a co-pay is always a set or fixed dollar amount. So it would be $10, $15, $20, $25, $30, $35, $40. That's what I mean when I talk about a copay. When I talk about a coinsurance, it usually means that your health insurance will pay 80% and you're responsible for 20%. Or your insurance will pay 90% and you're responsible for 10%. Does that all make sense to everyone? Okay, great. All right. So for the insurance billing specialists, what we have to do is we have to abstract information from the record. And what we're pulling from that record, give me one moment. We are pulling from that record the code, the diagnoses, the services that are rendered. We're pulling the complete insurance claim form. We're posting the entries into the financial accounting record. And then we're following up on unpaid claims. So at the bottom of 9 on the left-hand column, that's where I'm talking about insurance billing specialists and what they abstract from the patient record. All right. Coordination of benefits over on the right-hand column of page 59. This is usually a statement that includes most policies and contracts with the providers. What you see on a coordination of benefits is when the patient has more than one insurance policy or dual coverage, the first insurance will pay and then the second insurance will pay. Or if they only have a single insurance, that primary insurance will pay and then the patient's responsible for the difference. What happens with the coordination of benefits is that it helps to prevent duplication or overlapping of payment for the same expense. You see a lot of Medicare patients have Medicare primary and then they have Anthem secondary or Federal Blue Cross or mail handlers or even some of these supplemental plans through AARP and United Healthcare, and a few others. Over on page 60, the general policy limitations, you will see that there usually is an exclusion for injury or illness that is not covered by the insurance policy. Some examples might be attempted suicide, military service, on-the-job injuries, fertility coverage, pregnancy, and pre-existing conditions. Pre-approval, underneath case management requirements on the right-hand column of page 60 in your textbook. The requirements for pre-approval, you will see eligibility, pre-certification, pre-authorization, and predetermination. When we talk about pre-certification, we are referring to discovering whether or not a service is covered under the patient's contract, whether it's surgery, hospitalization, or tests. Pre-authorization relates not only to whether a service or procedure is covered, but also to finding out whether it is medically necessary. And then your predetermination simply means discovering the maximum dollar amount that the carrier will pay for that service. Choice of health insurance. All right, types of health insurance. There's a whole bunch of different ones. Bear with me one moment, please. All right, so a person can obtain health insurance, first of all, by taking out a group plan or policy. Usually you pay a premium on an individual basis. Then you have the group contract, which is usually an insurance plan by which a group of employees or other group is insured underneath that policy. Over on page 62, there's a conversion privilege where you'll see physicians obtaining comprehensive group coverage. Sometimes you might see this as a blanket contract. If you look on page 62 and 63, you'll see some good examples of an insurance predetermination form, and then the letter that is supplied to the patient as an estimate for the services being performed. Over on page 64, you have medical savings accounts, which are similar to health savings accounts. It's basically you're putting money into the account. For an MSA, the money is tax deductible for both the employer and the employee. With your health savings account, you usually can only have so much in your account before it's kind of capped off. Health reimbursement arrangements is where if you have a high deductible, you have put money aside that for this high deductible plan, the money gets taken from that fund and pays your services through that fund. And then once the money's run out, the money is run out. Your HFSA, these are healthcare flexible spending accounts. Money is in an account. You have a card to use like a credit card or debit card. Pretty similar with the high deductible health plans. An individual contract is an insurance plan issued to just an individual and its dependents. Usually this type of plan, you'll see a lot of higher premiums. So the types of health insurance coverage that we have the Veterans Health Administration, which is also CHAMP VA. We have competitive medical plans, also known as CMP, not Central Maine Power. This is a type of managed care organization. We have consumer-directed health plan, and you'll see that these are rapidly emerging plans that are also referred to as self-directed health plans. You'll notice that there are also disability income insurance. Basically, it's a health insurance that provides for periodic payments for someone who has become unable to work due to an injury or illness. Then we have exclusive provider organization, EPOs. I don't see many of those here on the East Coast. I noticed that these are more across the country. Foundation for Medical Care. This is an organization for physicians sponsored by your state or local medical association. Health maintenance organizations are also your managed care, your HMO plans, your indemnity health insurance. These plans are referred to as the traditional or fee-for-service health plans. I'm on page 65 in your textbook. Then your IPAs. These are the independent or individual practice associations. This again is a form of managed plans. I'm not going to go on to read the rest on page 66, but you have heard of some of these, if not all of these. All right, let's go through one of the examples of insurance billing on page 67. So let's just look at case number 1. The new patient comes into the office with a sore throat and an infected nail. There's an evaluation and management done, and then we will discuss more of these codes when we get into chapter 6 for procedural coding. But if you can think of it this way, whenever you go to the doctor's office, you're going for an evaluation and management, what we call an E&M code. So the doctor is going to bill for those E&M services, and then you might get a penicillin injection. And they might even do a little surgery for the infected nail. And then there's going to be a sterile surgical tray, which may or may not be billed depending on your third-party payer. So if you can think about it in the manner that whenever you walk into that doctor's office, pretty much anything that happens in that room can be billed for. X-rays, lab tests, even those little freebies that they give you because the rep, pharmaceutical rep came by, they're supposed to be free. Make sure you pay attention to your bills. Page 67 over on the right, handling and processing insurance claims. There is still some manual preparing of claims for submission. What do I mean by that? We still have to enter the information into the computer. We still might have to fax some things. To fax them, we still have to scan the information into a file on the computer. We might contract with an outside service. And we might even use some telecommunications networking system. So let's turn the page over to 68. Now, what I like about this book is that it shows you the difference of manual versus electronic. So, phase 1, they walk you through the 7 different steps: the patient appointment, the pre-registration, obtaining the insurance, the HIPAA notice of privacy practices, getting a copy of the insurance card and making a photocopy, getting patient signature requirements, assignment of benefits, and then the patient's financial account. Then, phase 2, we see that services are performed, the encounter form is completed, and the patient's financial data is posted and the patient is checked out. Then we have phase 3. The insurance claim is electronically created. Claim is transmitted. The provider's signature is in there. Then we track the pending insurance claims via the practice management software. Then in stage phase 4, we have the payer processing, where we receive the payment with the explanation of benefits. We post, whether it's electronically or manually. We have the bank deposit and unpaid claims followed up. Then we have balance due statement mailed to the patient. And then full payment is received and financial records are retained. Now, if you are still doing paper, which, Lord, I hope you are not, you are posting and handwriting everything on the claim form. There are still very few out there doing paper, and I mean very few, but it is very time consuming. When you send a claim electronically, you can pretty much get paid within 14 days. Medicare still takes 30. If you send it on paper, you're looking at 3 to 5 weeks. I think it's a no-brainer. You really want to do electronic if you can do electronic. And then they show you over on the right-hand page of 69, it talks about the electronic claim for services. It's received in the insurance, what happens when it goes through the insurance, and then how it gets sent back to the provider. Over on page 70, you'll see that there is a patient registration form. The patient signs it at the bottom. When the patient signs it at the bottom, that basically means that you are accepting assignment. The patient is allowing you to get paid. And that's what is meant by signature on file. On page 72, they show you a copy of an insurance card. And most of the insurance carriers here are pretty good about keeping the cards up to date and the information up to date. So it's important for you to read those cards, get copies of the front and back. Now, if you are filing electronically, just because the address on the back of the card is different for different patients, it does not mean that you have to submit to each different address. If you are submitting electronically, all of the claims go to the same address electronically. What do I mean by that? Every insurance has what is called an electronic data interchange payer code, an EDI payer code. So it would be 5 characters, and you would enter your insurance into the computer, and then there's a tab that says EDI payer number. You would enter that 5-digit code. So if you had 50 different patients that all went to Aetna, but of those 50 patients, you had 20 that went to a Kentucky address and 20 that went to El Paso, Texas, and 10 that went to Louisiana. You only need to set up Aetna in your system once, because they all get routed through that main number, which is the EDI number. Only if they were to go on paper would you want the separate addresses. And the only reason you really need to submit anything on paper now is if you're doing a form of a corrected claim. And sometimes, more often than not, they will allow you to fax those. over on page 73, up at the top right-hand corner, I just talked about assignment of benefits. There at box 13 on the health insurance claim form is where the patient's signature would indicate I authorize the insurance company to release funds to the payer. The encounter form, over on page 75, the encounter form is also known as a charge slip, a multi-purpose billing form, a patient service slip, a routing form, a super bill, or transaction slip. This is usually what is attached to the patient's medical record during their office visit. It combines the bill, the insurance form, and the routing document. It is also something that you will see is computerized now, and it will be a multi-purpose billing form where you can input the charges and the diagnoses into a patient account. So if you look on page 76, you'll see what I'm talking about as far as a multi-purpose form. The top half tells me what procedure codes the doctor is doing. The bottom half tells me what diagnoses he's choosing. It's also telling me when to have the patient return for a visit down at the bottom. Over on page 79, the provider's signature. Some of the acceptable formats for the provider's signature would be handwritten, a facsimile stamp, or electronic signature. If it happens to be computerized, it can be a digitized signature, it can be a button or a pin or biometric or a token, or an electronic signature. And if you look over on page 80, it shows you a couple types of different signatures right there. Now, use of a signature stamp is not really recommended by most of your carriers. They just want to make sure that you have an updated signature policy, because signature stamps are often misused and abused. I do not recommend you have a signature stamp. All right, let's just talk a little bit about following up on claim forms. So with the electronic systems, these systems should generate a log of the claims so that you know what you've sent out and how long it's been, so that you can follow up on it. If you're doing it by paper, it's important to make sure that the patient's financial record is kept up to date. You can also run what is called an aging report every month, and you use your electronic system to pull off the accounts receivable amount. What that will do is it will show you a snapshot of how much money is due from every patient as well as every insurance. You can call it a tickler file, and it will also show when deposits are received. And right on page, I believe, 78, page 78, they actually show you a ledger card, which is pretty old. That's not something that's used right now. It was used when I first started, some 20 years ago. But if you were to look at a patient statement that's printed electronically, it would look very similar to that. Do I have any questions at this point? All right, then let's go ahead and move on to chapter 4, which is medical documentation and the electronic health record. All right. On page 87, chapter 4. So some documentation basics. When you are documenting, whether it is electronically or manually, you want to identify the most common documents that are found in a medical record. So if you look on page 87 and 88, you'll see what they're talking about. So patient registration, a medication record, history and physical exam notes or reports, progress or chart notes, consultation reports, and the list goes on. What are some of the advantages of having an electronic health record? What do you think, Angel?
You can look up stuff quicker than going in and like a filing cabinet and technology.
Right. And more often than not, you can have more than one person be in that electronic record at the same time and not have to worry about it. You can
But also as a patient, you can get into your medical records too electronically. They give you a code when you get home to go on and look at what they did, the charges that there are.
Yes. They're starting to do that. They've started doing that over the last couple of years. And what you'll notice is that some of that information can be limited as well. You might not have full access to everything. Okay. So then, what would be a disadvantage of an electronic health record, Barb? All right, some of the disadvantages would be the startup cost would be pretty high. And then with the increased accessibility, you have a greater concern for confidentiality and security. Some of the other disadvantages would be what people are called canned notes or cloned notes. When they do documentation, they want to see that the documentation is very specific to that patient. They don't want to know that you saw 20 patients that day and all 20 notes have pretty much the same type of information. They want you to make it specific to the patient. They also want to see medical necessity. Your incentive programs on page 89. Your incentive programs were, the federal legislation actually established the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, which helped healthcare industry change to electronic medical records. So by doing so, physicians have to meet certain requirements. So an eligible professional is also known as an EP, and federal incentives also include PQRS, e-prescribing, and EHR programs. So for physicians, they had to basically take all of this on, and the cost has been pretty astronomical for some people. PQRS is an incentive program that results from 2006 Tax Relief and Healthcare Act. E-prescribing is Section 132 of the Medicare Improvements for Patients and Providers Act. And the electronic health record incentive was established as part of the ARRA of 2009. And what most people don't understand is that it was actually President Bush who started the ball rolling for this whole electronic health records way back when he was president. Meaningful use. Meaningful use is demonstrating the healthcare organization has capabilities and processes in place so that the provider is actively using electronic certified EHR to, number one, improve quality of care and patient safety, engage patients and family in management of their care, improve care coordination, and maintain privacy and security of patient health information. Now, if you have all been to the doctors, you all kind of have some idea what I'm talking about. How many have laptops or computers in the room when you go in with the physician? Or if you've been in the hospital, there's a computers right in there, or they have one on a portable cart that they bring in, and all of your information is now inputted into that computer. This is all part of meaningful use. Now, for these newer doctors, that's really not a problem because the majority of them are technologically adept. They have been working with computers for a while now, and they probably learned it in their training. But when you get to some of these older practitioners, and that's who I deal with a lot, is the older practitioners who have been in practice for a while, who are coming away from paper charts and going into electronic health records. They're finding this very cumbersome, very hard to transition to because the electronic notes are not as quick and easy to click on or push a button, and the templates are not the way they would want it written, so they think and they want to go in there and change all of that around. So as much as EHR and what we call MU is going on, you'll notice that there are documenters or scribes that actually go in with the physician and work the computer while the physician is actually having face-to-face time with you. Okay? So that's a whole nother career field that you could actually get yourself into, is being a scribe or a documenter. As you all know, there are different names for physicians over on page 91. I'm not going to go through all of those. Over on 92, what is legible documentation? Well, if it's handwritten, the entries in the patient's record must be legible, which means that such entries should be returned to the physician for clarification and or rewritten. Medical necessity. What is medical necessity or medically necessary? The third-party payers and federal programs have a responsibility to ensure that professional services are provided to patients where medically necessary. So your documentation must support the level of service in each service that was provided. The documentation guidelines. They show you what they are there for: evaluation and management services. Let me just back up to the paragraph right above documentation guidelines. It is the legalities of health record billing patterns. I'm not going to go through every one of these, but issues that happen is usually intentionally billing for unnecessary services, billing incorrectly for services, billing for diagnostic tests without a separate report in the health record, changing dates of service, waiving co-pays, using two different provider numbers, using improper modifiers. Those are just some things to look for. When we talk about documentation, the documentation process, we start out with a chronological, detailed recording of a pertinent facts and observations. Usually it's about the patient's health as we see it in the chart notes and the medical reports. So we need to make sure when we're documenting for this patient, we want to put it in as much of their words as possible. Now, I mentioned to you earlier some of the common medical documents is the patient registration form, the medication record, the history and physical exam, the progress or the chart notes, and so on.
Doreen?
Yeah?
Oh, you can hear me. This is Darla.
Okay,
Hey,
Darla.
I got it working. Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Back on when you're talking about the legible documentation and the medically, the medical necessary documentations coming from the doctor, can you give an example on how you would approach him with these things?
Hey, Doc. I can't read what you wrote here. Can you tell me what you wrote? I can't make this out.
Yeah,
Short, sweet, and simple.
yeah.
In
I've had
order
to
for
do that
me to-
before.
In order for me to take care of this for you and make sure that the patient's getting what they need appropriately, can you please tell me what you wrote here?
Okay. Do you get a lot of flack sometimes, or?
No.
Okay.
They just look at me like I have two heads.
Yeah, yeah. I thought. Thank you.
I said, look, if I can't read it, I can't do what you need me to do.
Yeah.
And if
Very
I
good.
can't read it, the insurance people sure as heck aren't going to be able to read it, and they're not going to pay it. So
Yeah.
how can I fix this so you get
Right.
paid? All right. Let's see. of this stuff in this chapter, I don't want to go too into depth because we're actually going to go into it even more in the Buck book. So give me a minute here. All right. Documentation guidelines, E&M services, we did that. Page 93. Turn over to page 94, signature log. Signature log, you will see up there. Actually, this should be part of your SOP or practice manual because everyone's name and position and signature and initials should be on file. Because if you have to sign anything in a record and it gets audited, they need to be able to understand who did it or who was in the record last or what was happening, who was working there, what was being done. And this also, the physicians do a signature log for Medicare because they're supposed to have their signature on file.
Oh, yes.
We talked about what? Nope. Okay. We already talked about the incentive programs. We talked about meaningful use. We talked about documenters. We talked about legible documentation. We talked about legalities. All right, SOAP notes over on page 95. SOAP. The S stands for subjective, and we will go over this in more detail in the Buck book. But the subjective is a statement of symptoms and complaints in the patient's own words. This is usually the chief complaint. O is the objective findings. This is the data from the physical exam and x-rays. A is the assessment of the subjective and the objective findings, so the medical decision making. And then P is the plan of treatment, which is usually documenting a plan for care to be put into action. Usually the doctor's recommendations or further testing. All right, then we have the documentation of history. When we document the history, we're documenting the chief complaint, the history of the present illness, the review of systems, and the past family and social history. Now, when we go into the E&M chapter in the Buck book, that's usually about chapter 15. We're going to go over this more. But a chief complaint can be simply sore throat, earache, stomach pain, chest pain, low back pain. History of the present illness is when did it start? How does it feel? How long have you had it? What makes it better? What makes it worse? Review of systems. They might check, if you come in with a sore throat, they're going to check your ear, nose, and throat. And then they might ask you past family or social history, any, ear problems, any headaches in your family, whatever's related to the illness with past family and social history. Are you a smoker? Do you drink alcohol? Are there any, diseases that we should be aware of? Throat cancer, smoker, that kind of stuff. So if you look over on page 99, here is a pretty good note about documentation. And then they also do an audit on that documentation. We're not going to go into that right now. Then you see on page 99, you'll see figure A and figure B. Figure A is the note, and figure B is the worksheet to audit that note. Documentation of the exam, we want to document the physical exam. We're going to document organs, systems, body areas, and elements of the exam. So on page 101, this would be a good one to tab for future reference. So for this figure, for page 101, a multi-organ system exam requirements. What they usually will show you is for a multi-system exam, the shaded areas should be pretty much what you focus on. So what they usually will for multi-organ is constitutional. So what do they mean by constitutional? Measurement of any 3 of the following 7 vital signs: sitting or standing blood pressure, supine blood pressure, pulse rate and regularity, respiration, temperature, height, weight, general appearance of the patient. Usually in a multi-organ system, a problem-focused exam, you probably will have 1 to 5 elements. So it would be a good idea to kind of just review this sheet. So if I say skin, you know that it has to do with the scalp and the tissue and the glands. Or if I say genitourinary for the female, that it would include the uterus and the urethra and breast exam. All right. One moment. All right, documentation terminology on page 102 and 103. Documentation terminology. We have E&M terminology. The first thing would be new versus established. New is anyone in your practice on page 104. New is anyone in your practice that you have not seen, or anyone in your practice that you have not seen in 3 years. Established is someone that you have seen and you do see, but you might not see them except for every 3 to 6 months. For the others, I'm going to have you read them on your own. Consultation, referral, concurrent care, continuity of care, critical care, emergency care, counseling. Now, for diagnostic terminology and abbreviations, basically, a lot of physicians use abbreviations in their documentation. So DX is diagnosis. IMP is impression. You will see that there are a lot of eponyms that should not be used if there are other medical terms that apply. How are you going to learn all this? You're not going to learn all that in this class. Basically, wherever you end up, you will learn the abbreviations that they utilize there. Ear, nose, and throat, ENT. RO, rule out. Let's look on page 109 108 and 109, you will notice that on 108 they have progress notes. It's very important that you understand everything should be initialed. With the software programs that we have today, because you have your own user ID logging in, it pretty much knows that you were the person who added that note. So it is going to be what's called date stamped and signed by you. The doctor is able to put their electronic signature in a record with a timestamp, a date and time stamp. Over on page 109, you will learn the different regions of the abdomen. You will notice that there are 4 quadrants and there are 9 regions. As we get further into the coding book, these will be very important to know. And in your coding book, your ICD-9 book, you actually have an anatomy chart that you will be able to tab so you know where it is. Some surgical terminology, just knowing what pre-op versus post-op means. Simple, intermediate, complex. Again, all of this stuff will be repeated in the Buck book. Let's talk about internal reviews on page 112. An internal review, the first type is a prospective review. This is where this is also termed pre-billing audit or review, which is usually done before billing is submitted. A retrospective is a post-billing audit and review, which is done after billing insurance carriers. Faxing documents, over on page 114. The term fax is derived from facsimile. You want to make sure that there is not a state law that prohibits transmitting a claim information via fax. Also, sensitive information should have a cover sheet. You want to confirm that the fax arrived at the destination. Never fax financial information. And always consult with an attorney regarding the faxing of legal documents. It's my understanding that you're supposed to have a disclaimer on your fax forms, your emails, that when you're faxing this stuff. You've all seen it or read it somewhere. This transmittal is intended only for the use of the individual or entity to which it is addressed and may contain information that is privileged, confidential, and exempt from disclosure under applicable law, blah, 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 blah. It's all on page 116 on the fax transmittal sheet. The subpoena process. This is something that is issued by a judge to obtain witness statements or records. It may not require an appearance in person, but you still need to be served the subpoena. Never accept a subpoena or give records without the physician's prior authorization. Basically, if a sheriff comes into the office, you go get the physician. Do not accept that subpoena on behalf of that physician. The retention of records, you will see on page 119, the record retention schedule. So your accounts payable record, your appointment sheets, 3 years. Accounts receivable, 7 years. Appointment sheets, 3 years. Bank deposit slips, if they're duplicates, 1 year. Bank statements and canceled checks, 7. There are no real federal or state guidelines. Let me just double check. Last I knew, you would check with your state first before you destroyed anything. Usually health records for active patients, they're saying 5 years for expired patients. If it's a child, you're supposed to actually keep the records up until they would turn 21. If it is a workers' comp or a PI case, you should hold on to it until the case is actually resolved and paid in full. Now, termination of a case on page 119 and 120. On 120, you will see an example of a letter. Basically, the physician is saying, I find it necessary to inform you that I am withdrawing from further professional attendance to you because you have been non-compliant and refused to follow my medical advice and treatment. Please find another physician, so on and so forth. How many people have gotten one of those letters? Well, if you haven't, what I'm telling you is that most practices now have developed or implemented such a procedure where if you have missed an appointment with them for 3 times in a row in the last 12 months, they send you what they call a dismissal letter, because basically you failed to appear for your appointment and didn't give them sufficient notice when they could have found someone else to take your spot. Prevention of legal problems. Make sure you keep patient information confidential. You want to report all physician activity which is illegal or unethical. Be aware of any hazards which may cause injury. Do not discuss other physicians with patients, and make sure you take the time to explain fees to patients. All right. Over on page 122 in box 4-1, Prevention of Lawsuit Guidelines for Insurance Billing Specialists. Just a good box to read over if you haven't already. So, make sure documentation corresponds with your insurance billing. Be aware of all the changes in insurance program guidelines. Always obtain written consent for a record release. There actually is a HIPAA compliant record release, so make sure you have the one that should be used. Obtain physician authorization before turning an account over for collection, and always act in a courteous and professional manner. All right. Any questions, ladies? I'm going to touch upon Chapter 5, which is diagnostic coding. And what I want you to do is at the on page 127, right up underneath diagnostic coding, I want you to write, will review further in the book. So on page 127 in your Fordney book, Chapter 5, Diagnostic Coding, write the note, will review further in the book. Diagnostic and procedural coding, I do not want to repeat myself on these two in particular. So for page 155, procedural coding, write the same note. Will review further in the Buck book.
That was 155.
Yes, 155. Page 155. So on page 127 and page 155, right at the top of the page, we'll review further in the Buck book. Now, what I will say to you about diagnostic coding is that diagnostic coding is the diagnoses. So, when you are given a diagnosis for an illness or injury, it is a diagnosis. It is a diagnostic coding. It is an ICD. Okay? And you usually end up with one or multiple diagnosis codes. And the first diagnosis code is usually related to the chief complaint. So that's all I'm going to tell you about diagnostic coding. Chapter 6, if you turn to page 155, chapter 6 is procedural coding. Procedural coding is CPT, current procedural terminology. And what it does is it demonstrates the procedure code or the procedure that was performed when you came into the practice, the emergency room, the ambulatory care unit, the wellness clinic, the express care clinic. It is the procedure code. It is the 5-character, 5-digit code that tells the insurance company that you came in for an evaluation and management, or that you came in and you had an incision and drainage done on an abscess. Okay? That is what a procedural code is. Any questions? Okay. On page 209, this is the paper claim form. What I want you to do with chapter 7, honestly, is simply review it. I want you to just look at it and understand it has 33 blocks, and each block you have different information that goes and belongs in each block. Now, I'm trying to find the final product here. Give me just a moment. Okay, on page. Let's look at page 253. So 253 in your textbook. $253 in your textbook gives you some insurance templates, so claim form templates. And it tells you right up in the right-hand corner. And actually, you don't even need to read the chapter. Just look at these claim forms for me. Up in the right-hand corner, the first one, it shows you that it's a private payer. There's no secondary coverage. Okay? Turn the page, and that's a Medicaid with no secondary coverage. Over on page 255, that is a Medicare with no secondary coverage. And they have it incorrect. On page 255 in box 11, I want you to write none. Page 255, box 11, write none. On page 256, you'll see that that is a Medicare and a Medicaid crossover claim. What do I mean by that? What that means is that Medicare is primary and Medicaid is secondary, and so you're putting the information in for both payers, and then it's getting sent from Medicare to Medicaid once Medicare pays. 257 is a Medicare and a Medigap crossover claim. A Medigap plan is an insurance, a secondary, a supplemental. Over on 258 is another insurance that is primary, and Medicare is secondary. So the primary insurance would get the claim first, and then the Medicare would get a copy of it second.
Can I ask a question? When you talk about the primary and the secondary, is it billed to the primary first and then the balance is billed to the secondary, or do they bill the exact same thing?
Nope, the balance is billed to the secondary. Good question.
Okay.
Yes. The primary insurance will pay what they consider to be the reasonable and customary, or the allowed amount, which is usually 70, 80, or 90% of the charges, what they consider allowed amount. And then once that is paid, it will go over to the secondary, and the secondary will pay their reasonable and customary allowed amount of the total charges left over. So that was a good question. Thank you for bringing that up.
Nothing will overlap?
They're not supposed to overlap at all.
Okay.
But sometimes it does happen. And sometimes the secondary actually ends up overpaying because they're not paying attention to how the primary paid it.
So what happens with that extra balance on the...
What happens is you, as the biller, are supposed to be on top of it and be aware that the secondary overpaid and do a refund.
Okay.
Yeah.
What if the patient receives that amount?
No, the patient does not receive it. The insurance
It'd be
would.
credit.
Okay.
Yeah. 259, we have TRICARE with no secondary coverage. Be careful with TRICARE, CHAMP VA. You have to be aware of what do they actually cover. 261, workers' comp. That's what a workers' comp would look like. What I want to draw your attention to here is box 10. If you look at box 10 from page 257 to 261, what the difference is that you are indicating it is an employment accident. On page 257, you're not indicating an accident at all. Okay? So for a workers' comp or a personal injury, you would put here whether or not you would put a yes in one of those boxes. So if it was an auto accident, you would check yes. Now, if it was an other accident, what do I mean by other accident? That means that, let's say you climbed on your roof and you fell off. There might be a rider in your homeowner's policy that would cover some medical care for that. That would be an other accident, okay? All right, let's talk about electronic claim, Chapter 8, page 265. EDI, what I want you to know here is that EDI is electronic data interchange. This is where data, understandable data, is sent back and forth via computer linkages between entities or trading partners. So I'm sitting in my office, I'm sending claims through to my clearinghouse, who in turn send it off to Anthem, Aetna, Medicare, Cigna, United Healthcare. They are trading partners. Encryption is used to assign a code to represent the data, and it is done for security purposes. Electronic claim is constructed from data. So all that information we just saw on those claim form templates is put into pretty much a column form, what they call loops, and every line has information in the loop that extracts data from the patient electronic health record, puts it onto electronic claim, and sends it off to the clearinghouse and the payer so that we can get paid. The advantages of the electronic claims are so that we get paid quicker, and it works. Page 270, you'll see table 8-3, and basically all of that electronic data that we send, the claim forms are considered an ANSI file. And there are electronic standards for HIPAA just as well as the privacy issue. Remember, when we talked about HIPAA, there were 3 areas, and electronic data or electronic standards is part of HIPAA as well. If you look on page 273, this is not something for you to memorize, just something for you to look at. It shows you that on the 1500 form locator, over on the left-hand side, okay, it shows you what item number, what title, and what loop. Remember, I just said a few minutes ago that all of the data becomes a loop on the form. Well, if you look, item number 1 is on the claim form, tells us, is it Medicare, is it Medicaid, is it TRICARE, is it a health plan? So the loop ID that it becomes is 2000B, and the segment in the data element becomes SBR09. So now you can forget what I just told you because you don't have to remember that. Honestly, you don't. But it goes on for the next few pages to show you that for every item number on the claim form, the loop that it would be if it were, when it creates an electronic data form. So what you see for those claim forms, those templates, you see it as very clear, understandable information. But what the electronic piece does is it pulls it all out and extracts it. And if you've ever just, accidentally been typing on the keyboard and it's a bunch of gobbledygook, that's what a electronic file format looks like when you go to look at it to send a claim. You don't see it the way we just saw it in the book. You don't see it as an actual claim. To see it as an actual claim, you would have to choose to print the file to text and not electronic. And then you would see it. Does that all make sense? Sort of? Okay. You really don't have to remember that. Let's see. The rest of the chapter really just gives you some basic information. If you look on 285, transmission reports, you send and receive files, you batch claim files, you have a scrubber report. What do I mean by a scrubber report? Well, through your clearinghouse, if there's any rejections or denials, the scrubber report tells you. Then you have a transaction transmission summary report, a rejection analysis report, and then electronic inquiry or claim status review. Then if there are some electronic processing problems, it might be because the billing provider address is incorrect or the zip code is wrong. Or over on page 287, the billing provider NPI, that needs to be on the claim form. Over on page 288, some solutions to electronic processing problems would be to make sure that you're validating all of your claims before you send them through electronically. Make sure you produce monthly aging reports. File the claims within the time limits. Double check the correct code for the place of service. Be accurate in linking the correct diagnosis codes. Billing and account management schedule. Make sure you have one. Send out claims every week. Follow up every week. Set a schedule in place that you can follow. All right. Page 292, records management. You have data storage, data disposal, electronic power protection, selection of an office computer system, data storage. Tell me a little bit about data storage, Emily, on page 292.
A paperless office requires an organized and efficient system for keeping files that are used to save to the hard drive. Wise to back up data frequently, daily.
Okay. What about data disposal, Teresa?
It's a security rule established with policies and procedures for final disposal of electronic, and the hardware of electronic media on which it is stored. It's easy to recover off of hard drives, CDs, and other media storage devices that are not properly erased or destroyed.
Yep, that's good. Electronic power protection, what would you do for that, Barb?
They're saying to use a power surge suppressor or receptacles with an uninterruptible power supply to prevent computer and data file damage.
Very good, thank you. All right, and then selection of an office computer system. Basically, you want to know what's the cost. Should you purchase it or lease it? What are the accessories involved? Are there space requirements? Do you need, specific electrical and transmission lines? Do you need a separate fax and modem line? What's going to be the cost of electricity, telephone lines, maintenance, software? All right. Any questions? All right, so I know that I ran through a couple of the chapters, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I only did that because we are going to cover these more in the Buck book. So when we finish up this book, we will go into the Buck book, and then at the end of at the end of the course, we're going to actually do a claim form. We might even do it after we start a couple of the chapters of the Buck book where we're actually coding both diagnosis and procedure codes. If you notice, I think off the top of my head it might be chapter 9. Let me just look. Yes, chapter 9, 10, and 11, 12. We start getting into, in the Buck book, the diagnoses, the CPT codes. Then chapter 15 and chapter 16, we start getting into coding. So at that point in time, I will probably have you do a claim form. So I'm going to write that down. Okay. So that's why I didn't go over these in depth tonight, because you're going to be lost if I do. And we don't have all of the books. Not everyone has all of the books to be able to look up the diagnoses and the CPT codes. So let's see here. Let's talk about all right, let's look at the study guide, the workbook.
What page?
Page 23. So, for homework, for chapter 3, page 23, let's do fill in the blanks on page 26. Let's do page 27 and page 28. 6, 7, 28. All right, let's do on page 33. I'd like you to do page 33. Page 34. In chapter 4, page 40. Page 42, do 26 through 32. Do all of page 43. On chapter 5, would be page 61. And true and false on page 64. On chapter 6, page 83. And page 86. So just 83 and 86, not 83 through 86. 83 and 86. All right. On chapter 7, page 107. And true and false on 110. So 107 and page 110. True and false. One moment. All right. On chapter 8, let's do page 135. And the multiple choice that starts on page 137 and goes through 138. All right. Did everyone get that? Did I go slow enough? And so we covered 3 through 8. Then reading for next week. Okay, for next week, read 9, 10, and 11. All right, so let me just kind of give you an overview for chapter 9 for next week. You don't have to write anything down, just listen. So chapter 9, we're pretty much going to discuss how we receive payments and insurance problem solving. We're going to identify some health insurance payment policies, some of the components that we see on the explanation of benefits. How do we post that? What do we look for? Then on chapter 10, we're going to talk about some office and insurance collecting strategies such as office flow, patient education, adjustments, missed appointments, professional courtesies, collecting fees, that type of stuff. Then for chapter 11, we're going to talk about the blue plans, the private insurance, and your managed care plans. We kind of touched on managed care plans just a little bit tonight, just the fact that they're HMOs, and we're going to talk about exclusive provider organizations, which we mentioned before early on, management of the care plans, medical reviews, who has the right to audit records, pre-authorizations for approval, co-payments, year-end evaluations, that type of stuff. Okay? So, you're probably wondering, what in the heck does this all have to do with billing, right? Okay, so let me tell you a story. We'll end the night with a story. So you go into your provider's office, and I know that's a boring story, but you go into your provider's office, and I want you to think about this now whenever you have to make an appointment to go into your provider's office. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Because my throat's killing me.
Yes.
You go into your provider's office. The moment you step foot through that door, you are there for an E&M. An E&M is considered a consult. So it's really simple. I'm going to just use, the sore throat and the headache. So you go in, you sit there, you're waiting, you go to the registration desk and they ask you, "So Mary, I haven't seen you in a while, are you still at," and they ask you your address, your phone number. "Do you still have Aetna for your insurance?" "Why, no, this is my new insurance card." So you get a new insurance card. And they scan it in that little lovely machine there that scans it right into their system. And then they ask you about, the emergency contact, who it is, what's the name. And then you sit in the waiting area, and the nurse calls you. So what's the nurse do? The nurse comes out, brings you back, and takes your height and your weight, and then brings you in and takes your blood pressure. She has already met one of the core measures for this whole EHR incentive program that's going on. All right, what does that have to do with you and billing? It has a whole lot to do with you and billing because it's a component of the E&M, which is the evaluation and management, or consult. Okay, so the nurse takes you back to the room, gets your blood pressure, and asks you what is your chief complaint. Yes, what are your symptoms? What are you here for today? What brought you in today? All of those different things, we just wonder, are they just making conversation? And then we wonder, why are we being asked the same thing by the doctor or the next person that walks in the room? Because they're all following protocol. This is all stuff that needs to be done in order to bill for your services appropriately. Hold on. Okay, so your chief complaint, sore throat, headache. Oh, and by the way, my low back is killing me. Okay? So she takes down all the information. She asks, when did it start? And she'll ask you about all three things. So when did the sore throat start? When did the headache start? What have you been taking for it? When did the low back pain start? What makes it better? What makes it worse? Is it radiating to any part of your, your body, down your legs, down your knees? Is it right side or left side? She types this all in. She finds out if you're allergic to anything. She confirms, are you a smoker, a drinker, how often? Anyone in your family have anything similar? Then she goes and gets the doctor. Now, the doctor won't necessarily ask you all of that past family social history stuff. He might, if he sees something different or new. He might say, well, tell me about, this or that. He's really concerned, or she's really concerned with what brought you in today. When did it start? How is it making you feel? So yes, they're going to ask you the same questions, but it is to review the information that the nurse just asked you, because the nurse cannot just write it in the chart and call it good. The doctor has to review everything that someone else puts in the chart. And when they do that, they put their initials, or they sign it, and they put the date and what they reviewed it. So then the doctor assesses what's going on with you and comes up with a treatment plan. So, have we covered this objective? Remember the SOAP we talked about earlier?
Yes.
We covered this objective? Okay.
Yes, we did.
How about the objective?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. And the assessment?
Yep.
And the plan?
Not yet.
No.
Right, because I haven't told you yet. I'm going to give you this prescription for the headache. Do this, go home and gargle with salt water for your throat, and if it's not better in 3 days, call me back and we'll either have you back in here or call you in for a prescription. I'm going to test you for strep right now. And then, for your low back pain, I'm going to give you some stretches. We'll try that and then use ice and heat on or off for the next 24 to 48 hours and call me back and let me know how you're doing. Okay, so there's our plan of care, plan of action. All right, you leave, you've got your prescriptions, you pay your
Okay.
copay, excellent. And you set up for your next appointment, if there is one, or your diagnostic test or whatever's going on, because they might test you for strep right there, or they might send you to the lab. I don't know who does what anymore. And you walk out. you just created a service or services to be billed on those claim forms that we just looked at. You can do an E&M. If they did a strep culture, we can charge for a strep culture. We can probably do a higher level of an E&M, like a 99212 or 99203, depending on if you are a new patient or an established patient. So this is all lingo and terminology that you're going to learn. But basically, I just gave you the first 8 chapters all in that little story. Pretty much. Okay? What we're going to cover in the next several chapters. Sorry, go ahead.
Why do you have to read all 8 chapters then?
Right. Shot us an email. Yeah.
No, we're just skipping around.
I know. So what we're going to be learning the rest of the chapters is really more about the insurances. What they cover, or not what they cover, but how they cover, how they came into play. What do we need to know as a biller in order to do our job better? So staying up on rules and regulations, knowing, as I told you in the beginning, one of my biggest pet peeves for denials is that we do not verify insurances. If we all verified insurances, we would not have such a huge accounts receivable that a lot of places do. So knowing why that's important and doing it and understanding that what you're billing out and what you're getting paid, if there's a difference, are you being paid appropriately? And if not, what do you do about it? So yes, the first 8 chapters I told you in that little story, but now there's that behind the scenes work that, the first 8 chapters make it look real simple, but the rest of the work is really the follow-up, the staying on top of what do I need my front desk to be doing, or if I am the single staff, single doctor office, what do I need to be doing on a daily basis to make sure that when I'm billing things out, they're going out clean the first time. Okay? So the next time you go to a doctor's office, I want you to think about that whole, flow of that little story that I told you and kind of see how it comes together, okay? Any
Good
questions?
timing. I got one Monday.
Okay. Good.
Yeah.
So you can kind of pinpoint the things that we talked about, okay?
Yep.
All right.
Are you going to be here?
Same time next week. So Emily and Teresa, I'm going to ask that you are there for me and you make sure the system is on, and I'll meet you there, okay?
Okay.
Because I'm coming straight from work, and I don't know how traffic's going to be from Lewiston to Brunswick.
Hopefully not another rainy night.
I hope not.
Two
Do you know
weeks in a row.
last week when I left, I was drenched.
Yep.
Drove home soaking wet, completely drenched.
When are we gonna need our buck book? Because they just sent me the CPT today, but no buck books.
Okay.
And they
You're
said
not
they
gonna-
sent some to Brunswick of mine to another Angel about, supposedly.
Really? Well, I don't have mine. So you're one up on me. I don't have mine. And
Yeah.
the buck book we probably won't use for probably another 3 weeks. So
Okay,
I'll email Amy tomorrow and find out if she has any more status than I do.
Okay. I just can't win with these books. I'm trying to play catch up, but
Well,
it's a hard
what
catch.
as I said last week, this is the hardest time of year to start the class because we're waiting on books to be published.
Yeah, fun.
So
Thank you.
have a great week, everyone. Thank you very much for your time tonight. And have fun.
Nice.
Bye.
box thing. I was trying to. I just got my book just as I was headed into class.
Oh,
I don't want to leave my information on there. Is it okay to put it beside? Or I'm looking like, okay. You just never know.
you have a good night.
Thank you.